Hey everybody, my name's Ryan, and here at etrailer we install, test fit, and review a lot of different parts. That way we could try to answer any questions those of you might have. And that's exactly what we're doing here today on our 2011 Chevrolet Traverse. We're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Blue Ox base plate kit with removable arms. So you're going to have a total of 5 main components needed to flat tow your SUV down the road safely. First one's going to be the base plate. The base plate is going to provide us with a solid and reliable connection point. That way we can hook our tow bar up to it. Now that tow bar is going to connect to the base plate here at the front of your vehicle to the back of your motorhome. And that's going to be that physical link that actually pulls your car down the road. The third main component is going to be safety cables. And those are there in the event of an unlikely disconnect. Those are going to keep the SUV connected to your motorhome. The fourth main component is going to be tow bar wiring. And so that wiring is going to plug into the front here and to the back of your motorhome, and that's going to transfer the lighting signals to the back of your Traverse. That way other motorists know your intentions as you're going down the road. And last but not least, the fifth main component is going to be a braking system. And what that braking system is going to do is apply the brakes in your Chevy whenever you hit the brakes in your motorhome. That's just going to help bring you to a more safe and predictable stop. And these aren't necessarily needed, but there are 2 more products that I would recommend picking up just to make your overall experience a little bit easier on you. And that is the Roadmaster Fuse Bypass as well as the Fuse Master. And I say that because Chevrolet does recommend that we take 2 fuses out every time you want to flat tow, and that can just kind of get tiring having to pop the hood, pull the fuses out, remember to put them back in every single time you want to flat tow. So what these 2 products are going to do is eliminate that. So as opposed to manually pulling them fuses out, all you'd simply have to do is flip the switch into the tow position and you're ready to hit the road. Whenever you are flat towing, you're going to want your base plate to give us that solid connection point. And all of the base plates that we offer are going to do that. But honestly, if it were me, I would want a base plate that would look pretty good too whenever you're not using that. And honestly, I think this one does a great job of it. It blends in pretty well. We don't really have to modify our front bumper a whole lot and make a bunch of cuts and hack everything up. And with that being said, this one's going to give us a nice clean factory appearance. But even though our base plate does give us a nice clean look, it doesn't mean that we're going to have to sacrifice the usability. It's still going to be very easy to operate and figure out and everything else. One touch that I do like is the fact that they give us some of these little caps. Whenever we're not using it, can pop those in. Not only does it look cleaner, but it does help keep any contaminants out. That way everything will operate smoothly. And since we have removable arms, whenever we are ready to hook up, all we're going to have to do is grab our arms, rotate them about a 1/4 turn until they lock into place. We can do that for the other side as well. And once we have those in there, we're ready to hook up to our tow bar. One thing I do like is the safety chain openings here. These things are nice and thick, and I feel like if something were to happen, I could really rely on these. And what's nice too, they come out just enough to keep everything looking clean and easy to use. So the majority of the safety chain hooks, at least the ones that I've seen, have been styles like this. And regardless which one you have, they're both going to fit on there with no problem. This base plate is going to work with the majority of Blue Ox tow bars, and even if you don't have a Blue Ox tow bar, chances are pretty good you can make it work, and that's because there's adapters available that you can put on your tow bar to connect to this base plate. So if that's your situation, you can always check right here at etrailer and find those adapters. There is one thing I do want to mention, and that is the use of a high-low adapter. And I say that because say our vehicle is going to be riding at a certain height, our base plate is, and chances are pretty good our motorhome is going to sit higher or lower than our base plate. And what we want is for our tow bar, whenever we have everything hooked up, we want that tow bar to be riding nice and level. So you want the hitch pin on your motorhome side to be within 3 inches of the pinhole here in the base plate. So what you would do is park on level ground, measure from the center of your base plate, hole there down to the ground, record that measurement. Do the same thing on your motorhome, measure from the pinhole to the ground, and as long as they're within 3 inches, you're in good shape. You're not going to need a high-low adapter. But if it exceeds that measurement, I would definitely recommend picking up a high-low adapter to keep everything nice and level. And you can find a bunch of different sizes and types of high-lows right here at eTrailer. So at the end of the day, a really clean, simple, and easy to use base plate that you really can't go wrong with. Now, as far as the installation goes, I'm not going to lie, it is a little difficult. You do have to remove the front fascia and do some drilling to get the base plate in, but honestly, that's pretty common with a lot of base plates. So as long as you take your time and stay focused, you should be able to do it at home. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and put it on together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the front of our Traverse, pop the hood, and what we're going to need to do is remove this plastic cover that runs along the length of our engine bay here. And this is going to be held in place by multiple push pin style fasteners. So all the fasteners are going to look like this, and the way to get them out is you're going to pry underneath the head of the fastener. I'm using a trim tool, it makes it easy, but you can also use a flathead screwdriver. And we're just going to pull the whole thing out like so. So I'll do that same thing to get all of the fasteners removed. So once you have all the push pins removed, you can come here to the corner. You can see the seal is connected. You can just kind of grab it and pop it up. You're going to do the same thing on the other side. And once we have those removed, should be able to grab our cover and set it to the side. Now what we can do, we're going to have 3 fasteners along this front edge, and we need to remove those. In our case, they're just Phillips head screws. So we'll get those pulled out and do the same thing on the other side of our vehicle. And I want to mention from this point on, anything we do to this side, we're also going to do to the other side, because it'll be set up the same way. Now if we come here to our wheel well along this front edge, we're going to have 2 T15 fasteners that we need to pull out. And when you're doing that, it does help to turn your tire in a little bit, gives you a little more room to work. So now that we have those out, we're going to have one more fastener. It's going to be right there in the corner, and we're going to use a 7mm socket to get that one removed. Now underneath the vehicle, along the front edge, we're going to have a few fasteners we need to pull out. We're going to have 2 T15 Torx bits. We'll get them out. And then you're going to have a 10mm right here that you can pull out as well. If you look, our plastic piece is actually broken there, so I'm not going to worry about pulling that out. If yours is connected though, you definitely want to get that bolt removed. Now with an extra set of hands, we can actually get our fascia removed. So what I did is just put some painter's tape along the seam here. That way we don't have to worry about accidentally scratching up our paint or anything. And what you're going to do is, starting from the corner here, you can kind of just pull out on it, and it will release these clips, and we can work our way around. We may or may not have some electrical connectors, so don't pull this off completely just yet. In our case, looks like we are going to have a connector. So if I can just kind of work this off, flip it around. To disconnect it, you're just going to push down on the center tab, pull the 2 apart, and there's going to be the same one on the other side. But with this removed, we can set it off to the side somewhere safe. So now if you look right here, we're going to have these flaps, and we need to trim some of it up to make room for the base plate. It's kind of a soft rubber. I'm just going to grab a pair of scissors and cut that piece out. We need to get this removed and out of the way. So we'll just go ahead and pull out this push pin fastener and set it to the side. Now what we need to do is trim out a portion right underneath our bumper here and this little plastic support. There's a diagram and the instructions that give you some measurements, and so I went ahead and drew those out. And when you're cutting this, you want to make sure not to cut into the flange behind here. So you want it level with the frame rail that's behind this. And when you're cutting this, you also want to cut just inside here, so you want to make sure to leave this center rib in place. So we're going to be cutting on this side of it down to about here. I'm going to use a couple of different tools to do this. I'm going to use a Dremel tool to cut out this portion and a little ways down here. And then I'm going to come back in with a saw to get a straight shot down here and get all this material removed. So you can use a few different tools, whatever kind of suits your needs the best to get this done. Now just over here on the driver's side, we need to remove this temperature sensor for the time being. Use a trim tool to release that fastener. It should just kind of pop out, and then what we'll do is just kind of lean it over the top of our bumper out of the way. On each side of our vehicle, we need to remove our horn. And this is pretty simple. We're just going to have one 10mm bolt up here. Pull that out. And what I'm going to do is just disconnect it. That way it's out of the way. To do that, there's a tab there in the center of the connector you push down on, pull the two apart, and I'll just set our horns off to the side. At this point, we can go ahead and remove our washer fluid reservoir. So we first want to start by disconnecting the electrical. We're just going to have a few of them. They're all going to work the same. You just pull back on the tab and it'll separate it. Just kind of push your wiring out of the way. And then we can disconnect the lines. I already pulled one off and let some of the fluid drain out. We just drained it into a bucket. Thankfully there wasn't a whole lot in there, but these are pretty straightforward though. You just pull it off and your fluid will drain out of those there. And then to actually remove our tank, we're going to need to remove these 3 10mm nuts. You should be able to grab our tank. Just kind of work it down and out. Now what I went ahead and did is just drew out a couple reference lines here on the side of our frame rail. That way it'll help us line up the base plate and make sure it's going to rest where we need it to. There are measurements in your instructions. And I will say, one thing I did notice, if we go the 6 1/4 inches this way from the front of our frame rail back, it's going to not only interfere with this stud, but also it's going to interfere with some of our plumbing lines on the front of our vehicle. The base plate's going to make contact with them. So what I've done is just shorten it up about 1/4 inch. That way it'll push the base plate a little more forward and we'll get that clearance that we need. Now we can grab our base plate and it's going to slide kind of in between them openings that we cut. We can make sure we get it in place. Once you have it roughly in place, I'm going to take a clamp and just clamp the base plate. That way it'll kind of hold in position and we can get it exactly where we need it to be. Now that we know we have the base plate level and where it should be, we can drill out a hole, and I'm going to be drilling out this one here through the pinch weld to the size listed in our instructions. With that hole drilled out, we can take a 1-inch bolt and we're going to apply some red Loctite. Matter of fact, all of the hardware that we're going to use to secure the base plate will get some of this red Loctite. You can grab this right here, etrailer. We're going to push this through. Then on the other side back here where the bolt comes through, I'm going to loosely secure a split lock washer and a hex nut. So what I went ahead and did is I simply tightened this bolt down on each side of our vehicle. So I used a 9/16 socket and wrench to hold the nut from spinning. And once that's tight, it's going to hold our base plate in position. That way you can get rid of the clamp. And then what we're going to do is take that same drill bit and drill out these 3 remaining holes using our base plate as a template. Once you have those drilled out, we can get the rest of our hardware in. For this opening down here, we're going to use the same setup as this one, just the 1-inch bolt, red Loctite. We're going to push that through, and on the other side, secure a split lock washer and a hex nut. For these two, we're going to do something a little bit different, and we're going to use what's called a handle nut. So the way these are going to work is there's an opening in the bottom of our frame rail here. We're going to feed that through, and that is going to line up with our holes there. You may have to kind of bend the handle nut accordingly to get it to line up correctly on the inside. And when you do that, be very careful. You don't want to grab this end and bend it directly there, because I have had these break off. So just something to keep in mind. And matter of fact, what I did is just put some sealer or some JB Weld around there too, just as a little bit of extra backup. That way we don't have to worry about them breaking. You don't have to, but it is a little precaution you can take. And what I suggest doing, so this is the bolt that's going to go through these 2 holes. It's a little bit longer one, and so you're going to put a split washer on it. Don't forget your red Loctite. These are going to feed through there. But before you do that, what I do suggest doing is taking your handle nuts and just running these in by hand. Make sure they go in nice and smooth, because sometimes the paint can kind of hang it up a little bit and make it a little tricky to get started. So on the bottom of the frame rail, you can see this is the opening that we're going to use to put our handle nut in and get it lined up. So now that we have all of our hardware in place, we need to come back and snug it all down. And then we need to come back with a torque wrench and tighten down all of the hardware to the amount specified in the instructions. After everything's torqued, what I'm going to do is come in with a pair of snips and just trim off that remaining handle nut. That way kind of cleans up our install look and prevents these from rattling around making a bunch of noise. Now what we can go ahead and do is reinstall our windshield washer reservoir. Now the 3 studs on the frame here that was holding the reservoir on, kit's going to come with a bunch of flat washers just like this. You're going to take 6 of them and place them over each stud. What that's going to do is kind of pull that tank out, and that way it'll clear our base plate. So got them on all 3. We will work this back into position and then just re-secure it using the factory nuts. Now we can go ahead, tighten everything down. We'll just plug all of our lines back in and our electrical connectors. Once we have that done, we can go ahead, grab our horn, and reinstall that just the opposite way that we removed it. Now we can go ahead and re-secure our temperature sensor. Now what you're going to do is just remove it from this bracket that it originally came on. Kind of just pinch those in, it pops out. And then on this plastic piece here on the driver side, I just drilled a 1/2-inch hole. And this is simply just going to push right into place. So now what we can do on each side is install our safety cables. Now these are pretty straightforward. I wrapped it around this portion of the frame. And this part here, it goes around the plastic. I simply just wrapped it around that to kind of take up some of the slack. And these are going to get connected to the base plate using this quick link. So that runs through the base plate and the cables go through it. And then what you want to do is make sure the safety cable is nice and tight. That way it's not moving around, touching other engine components or anything like that. So I removed all the slack and secured it using a handful of zip ties. And I did it the same on each side of our vehicle. Now at this point, it would be a great opportunity to install some of your other flat toe components like a braking system or diode wiring. And I say that because we're going to have all this extra room to work with our fascia still removed. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And if you have those components, I recommend you do that as well. So now at this point, what we can do is reinstall our fascia now that we have our other components on. What I went ahead and did was just kind of held our fascia up to the front of our vehicle as best as I could and looked to see where our base plate interferes with our grill. And it looks like there's really not a whole lot we're going to have to remove. I put a couple of marks here, and I think that's the only area that we should need to trim out to let our base plate pass through. I'm going to get these cut out, test fit it again, and if you have to come back and cut out a little more, no big deal. This is relatively thin plastic. I'm just going to use a tool like this. You could also use regular snips, probably a Dremel tool, utility knife, whatever you have laying around. So I went ahead and put our fascia back into position. And I want to mention I did have to cut out another rung right there. So I actually did that with the fascia on the car. It just quite didn't want to sit perfectly flat. So I cut that out. And then I also just had to cut out a small opening there. That way our wiring connector was more accessible. But now that we have this on the front of our vehicle, we can go ahead and re-secure it the opposite way that we removed it. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Blue Ox base plate kit with removable arms on our 2011 Chevy Traverse.